and then I did forensic. I was the supervisor of forensic mental health unit in Solano County for about 7 years. And currently, outside of my business, which I represent when I come and do trainings here at News of Constellation Consulting and Training LLC with my partners Katie Stiff and Chris Van Orden. I am also a program director with Aldea substance abuse programs in both Solano and Napa currently. So I've had a little bit of experience in a lot of different spaces. And this is by far one of my favorite things to do, is to come and sit down. I'm going to stop standing in a second and I'll actually sit down and we'll facilitate this really like a conversation. So the more engaged you are, the more questions you have, the more you participate, the quicker the time will go, the more productive we'll be. And if you don't, I'm not going to judge you. If you don't, I'm going to judge myself, because it's my job to get engagement and to present something that gets folks talking. I am going to start with a pretty heavy video. As you know, at News and other agencies around, the content of what you see day in and day out is trauma. It's trauma affected. You see trauma, you work in crisis, you do crisis placements, I'm sure, you do shelter placements, you do a lot of work where you're in the trenches of very traumatic narratives, very traumatic stories. There's also a tremendous amount of resiliency that you see. So I don't want to lean totally on the trauma side of it when people are able to move through, typically with the help of someone safe. You know, the benefits of seeing progress and seeing change and seeing people become safe is one of the greatest feelings that anyone could ever have. And I hope that you have as many or at least a good amount of those experiences to sometimes counteract what the treatment folks previously used to call failures, which I won't call failure. What we will call is just how difficult change is for any of us. Particularly for people steeped in histories of trauma, sometimes generational trauma. Can the folks online in Zoom, can you guys hear me? Okay. So we're gonna start off with a video, and then after the video, we'll do a check-in round. And then based on that check-in round, we'll move on to some material about vicarious secondary trauma and other types of trauma. Can you do the, it's just the very first video there. The one that's been playing here. And the screen share is there for them.
My mother and one of the murders in front of me. He put it on my head. Just trying to. What's it called?
You said that I was a victim and that I was with you. Well, especially when you're little, because it's like a big secret that's always in your back that you don't know.
Not through Zoom,
when
but
it's gonna
through
come
the
out.
actual computer setting.
We ran into this doing the MI training too, and I think they ended up getting a speaker.
What was it? Then how do you change it to, you know, the settings? No, so go to the bottom right of your screen. Where the speakers are, can you change it the up area?
The image of my brother falling on that concrete floor and people stepping and just kicking with shoes on his face. I couldn't get that image out of my head.
It is an overwhelming event. It takes away our safety. It creates a sense of helplessness, and it continues to affect our perception of our reality.
Some of the telltale signs of trauma are quite evident. Many of these symptoms, it's not that we don't see them, it's that we don't put together the entire sort of picture of what trauma is. Inability to sleep or interrupted sleep, inability to focus on what's going on, really not able to attend to learning. Adults need to be aware of children who are exposed to violence and intervene early and stop it.
I don't like the environment that I stay in. People getting killed every day, drug deals, people getting snatched, raped, cut up.
Whether it is a child who witnesses violence or a child who is the victim, you can't be fearful and be able to live your normal life. You have to be able to think clearly, and when you're traumatized, you can't do that.
Violence continues then to affect a child and their perception of their community, of their family, that danger is right around the corner. And the brain gets wired to expect danger.
My dad started actually physically beating me to the point to where I go to school with covered in bruises. I don't know how many times I've been threatened to be killed by my own dad.
My brother got shot in the head. He didn't make it.
It makes you afraid at times. It makes you feel that, oh my God, you know what? I just lost a friend. I just lost a family member. It just makes you feel that, hey, I could die next. I could be the next one dead.
What trauma does is it triggers what's called the amygdala in the brain, which is our fight, flight, freeze center.
And it truly is a change in the brain and a change in the stress hormones that are flowing through the body.
All our brains have what we call alarm systems, because the brain now has been wired for danger and it's triggered into this fight flight. We don't just get over a traumatic event, it continues to impact us.
I started hearing my mom screaming in the middle of the night. And it got to the point where he started beating me and my sisters. I let my anger build up, didn't talk to anybody about it.
When you hold everything aside, it's like a bomb and it's like ready to explode and just somebody push that last button.
Most kids who've experienced violence oftentimes have experienced multiple types of violence. In the kids we see, the average number of different types of violent trauma is 4. And so complex trauma then affects multiple areas of the brain because it's ongoing.
Maybe it's gang warfare, maybe it's drug use and abuse in the family, maybe it's domestic violence, maybe it's bullying at school. And if there is a layering effect of cumulative violence that changes literally the DNA.
It all started off with a hugging game. He would take us into his room. We would sit on his lap and he would hug us, and we weren't supposed to tell anyone.
When I was 5, I would have to leave kindergarten class and go home and have sex with this man who was in his 50s. I remember walk home and crying, falling down and having to get back up and walking on.
Child sexual abuse exists in the neighborhood, exists unfortunately at our schools, at our churches, at our homes, everywhere. And there are children out there suffering.
Our first assault was in high school. I met a guy at a church and he wanted to be my friend. I thought it'd be great. And instead he assaulted me and I felt very scared.
When you have a child that doesn't get to work through that abuse in an appropriate manner, that abuse doesn't go away. It lives in that child.
Exposure to violence in childhood has been found to be associated with a really unbelievable range of long-term impacts.
Very young children who are exposed to violence many times have difficulty in establishing a trusting relationship. These children have fears.
You're twice as likely to develop depression. You're probably 3 times as likely to develop some type of anxiety disorder.
As they move into school age, they may have very, very serious behavior problems. As we look at adolescents, we see children running away. Sometimes children may be involved in the juvenile justice system. which puts the child at risk for being an adult offender. And so the cost of violence is staggering.
I felt isolated. Nobody knew what I was going through. To go 3 years without talking about it, I imploded.
Finally, after like stressing and keeping everything bottled up and everything building up, I just finally broke down one day and attempted suicide.
Suicide is the third leading cause of death of children and adolescents in this country. We always ask in every case, what role might child abuse have played?
My mother, she knew that stuff was going on, but it just seemed like she didn't really care. She never stopped that abuse. And to this day, I've never forgotten what some of my family members have done to me.
These are traumatized kids. And so how do we then, as adults, professionals, caregivers, put a system around children that really is trauma informed?
Happy feeling, good job, okay? So
What do we do differently to help rewire their brain? And then ultimately, how do we build capacity in order to really help our kids?
Everybody come together, whether it's in the community, in the home, in the school, wherever children are, and child by child, think of ways in which we can intervene early and educate people about what children need in order to grow, to thrive, and to continue to be resilient human beings.
So what we're gonna do is a round of introduction. I wanna know your name. I wanna know to your comfort level, what motivates you to wanna be a volunteer with news, okay? I say to your comfort level with an acknowledgement that oftentimes people enter this field through lived experience. So I want to ensure that this is not a therapy group. You don't have to talk about that today with us, but I am curious what motivates you to do the work. Again, to your comfort level. I got a big smile over here, is that right? I like people that are their emotion on their sleeve. It's helpful. And then I'd like you to just tell me what your thoughts, feelings, kind of what came to your mind when you were watching the video. Okay, and we'll take it from there. And I would love, and sometimes I forget the folks on Zoom because I'm in the room. So if I forget about you, yell at me. And then you are an active part of this conversation too. So I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to introduce yourself and participate. So who would like to take a risk in starting?
I'm Peggy, and I've lived in Napa for well over 20 years now. And as I was finishing my working career, I wanted to fill that void with something relevant and meaningful, and I always look towards volunteers and the way to do that, wanting to help members within the community. I do have a history with domestic violence, so I thought that gave me an interesting perspective to maybe help others. In terms of the video itself, I guess I'm always amazed at the prevalence of the child abuse that we see. And if you look into a classroom of 30 kids, it's like you can say that there's probably 4 or 5 of them who are getting abused, and that just is amazing to me. And I think the other part of the video is that your brain actually gets rewired, and I think that is scary to think that that can actually happen. And that it's something that you can actually take with you the rest of your life.
I can't spell, so I firmly recognize that prevalence is probably misspelled.
Yeah.
And whenever I write, I always do this. I'm of the age where we learned how to spell phonetically. If you spell phonetically, you spell it wrong. I'm not gonna redo that. Although if anyone was in the colors training that we did way back when, I'm guessing that some folks in the room will be uncomfortable with that misspelling on the board. Thank you very much, Peggy. I appreciate you. Who would like to go next?
Oh, okay, go ahead. You sure? Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
I'm Sandra. My motivation is I'm an employee. I work for the housing department. I've been there a little over 2 months now. I do have a little bit of personal experience in that. With domestic violence. I don't think I've ever shared that. I won't get into detail, but I do have that background. My response to the video, I feel like we constantly use that saying that children are resilient. But then on the flip side, we're like, oh, but the third leading cause of death is suicide, and where they have PTSD and they don't have the if we don't handle their if they don't take care of the emotional part and we don't address it, then we have all these other problems that lead to anxiety. And so how are they resilient? How are we still using that? Children are so resilient. When at the end of that is suicide is the number, is the third leading cause of death for children. So that bothers me.
And that's in part, I'll respond to that because I used it, right?
Yeah.
When I use that statement, people, regardless of all those statistics, and I hold on to this, are capable of phenomenal things.
Right.
And you see people who've been through just incredible trauma, really own their lives and become really very happy people. And the numbers are still there, right? I like to talk about the dialectic. Like the dialectic means that two opposite things can happen at the same time. It's like in the dialectical behavioral therapy, you can hate something and love it at the same time. You all in the work see that all the time, right? And it's part of what can drive feeling unsuccessful when somebody goes back to be with an abusive partner, somebody does something that, that sort of thing. So I appreciate that honest response. Because I never want to undermine the severity and significance of the type of trauma that we're talking about and its effects. And I also think that the person in the video, I forget which one, did a phenomenal job of talking about early intervention for those types of things. And what it's like to have safe people and safe spaces to be able to finally be safe enough to tell your story, right? And be safe enough to tell your story in an environment where it is heard, held, and not judged.
Yeah, but how are we able to access that through all economic, classes? If not there, we're not there yet.
All that stuff, which is why we do this, right?
Yeah.
which is why we need more volunteers, which is why we need robust training. And which is why, and we're gonna get to it after the check-in, why we need to reflect and care for ourselves. And what that really looks like in doing the work. I love that question, and it's gonna come up again. So hold on to it. Who would like to go next? You were going to.
I'm Susanna, and my motivation, I was also a YM survivor of domestic violence, and I actually went youth for services. So I always, ever since I left, I've worked to return at some point and give back, and finally made it back. So that's what my information is. And then in response to the video, you kind of took it from me. I was focusing on like the children and how, you know, it's true, like the early interventions and treatment and, you know, access to support is so crucial because they are affected as children, and not having those resources or treatment will affect them as they age or get into other relationships or are exposed to other things when they grow up. I have noticed that some of the children might grow up to be okay and not be affected until they're like older, like adults. So that's what came up.
Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Which
And kind of manifesting older behavior as opposed to when they're younger.
Yeah, so, you know, children tend to like internalize a lot of things and not talk about anything, especially if they're not getting any like support services. So later on in life, you know, they might be triggered by, I don't know, other people, relationship, things that come up, reminders, certain triggers and can affect them.
So, and kind of what I'm hearing you talk about is sometimes things can be unconscious. And it's a word I use because suddenly you can see behavior manifest in latency teenager, later teenager, early adulthood without necessarily being conscious of why that's coming up. You know, why am I going off in this space? Why am I so angry in this space? Becky, can you help me out?
VAL. Was I the one looking at you like, God, just not right?
You answered that question. So, and I wanted to respect that.
Well,
So we can move.
Well, you've done, I was surprised you got unconscious.
Well, I went to a depth psychology school, so I had to write that word quite a bit. In grad school. Who would like to go next, including folks on Zoom? Okay. Yeah.
My name is Nicole. My motivation is, I think it's important for people to give back and help in any way that they can. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a paid job to get paid to do it, so. But it's important to me to help to try and make a difference in somebody's life. When I thought about that video, it's very relatable, unfortunately. And I wish more adults would notice the signs, the difference in children when they're experiencing trauma. And it reminds me that it is important to heal from trauma because it does manifest as an adult. And it affects your relationships and creates anxiety and depression. And so it's very important to heal from that trauma for yourself and those who interact with.
I'm gonna ask you another question. What does healing mean?
Acknowledgement, forgiveness for yourself, letting go of the shame, and just learning and finding who you are. And also, you know, I guess I wouldn't say the most important, but forgiving the person that harms you.
One of my favorite movies is a movie called, oh look, it's such a favorite movie, I can't remember the name of it. In this important moment, it's called Unlikely Friends. And it was produced by a group of people through a prison system called Insight Prison Project. They did a lot of work at San Quentin. And what they would do is called restorative justice. I don't know if you ever heard the phrase restorative justice. But they would bring victims, survivors, perpetrators together with their acknowledgement and agreement to do it. No one is sprung into those situations like a reality TV show or anything like that. And the type of healing that came from understanding where one person came from and the other person came. Now, that's not for everybody. Not everyone can do that, and it's not everyone should do it, right? But the ability to do it for those who that is important for can be a very powerful healing factor. And that was sort of one of why I asked the question, because healing can look different, right? It can look different for people. You know, some people would want that, some people wouldn't want that, right? And both of those are okay. So, who hasn't gone? And the folks in Zoom. We only have one.
My name's America.
Hi, America.
I'm currently a student in the state for criminal justice. My motivation is my own personal experience growing up. I was sexually molested at a young age, and when I told my parents, they didn't do anything about it. So growing up, that kind of motivated me to be the help that I didn't receive. And I always had an interest in just helping women and men that have been sexually assaulted and victims. A little bit about the video was response to it was, like they said, that later on when you grow up, you can have all these like symptoms of all of the trauma that you went through, and I went through that as well. With my parents labeled it as acting out, but I really wasn't acting out. I just wanted attention from my parents that I never received when I needed the help.
Thank you. Deep breath, you're right. I'm honored that you shared that. I'm grateful that you shared that, and I want you to take care of yourself. And if the group can give you support, please let us know. I'm going to take a microscope away from you. Okay. Let you take some deep breaths, but for the rest of the group, I'm going to come back to that visceral place that she just went, right? I almost call it numinous, where you become connected to a deeper emotion that's usually based in something, right? And that's something that for all of us can come up when we're working in these settings, and why it's important, even though it's uncomfortable, to acknowledge and talk about it from time to time. It doesn't have to be in this space. So, and I'll make sure that everyone knows that this is not a space where that is required, but for longevity in the field, if you don't reflect, you'll project. And if you come into contact with that type of emotion, you need to develop tools to take care of yourself with it, right? Because that will come out in work. It can come out in the work, right? Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We're to the Zoom folks. Some of you have very lovely pictures.
I can go ahead and talk.
Cool. I'm gonna move closer to the speaker.
Okay. My name is Alexis, and I was drawn to this work. Well, actually, I was introduced to news through work. I work at Pacific Union College, and I work on sexual violence, stalking, and domestic violence prevention on our campus.
Did you work with Christy Mance at all?
I'm sorry, do I work with who?
Did you work with Christy Mance in the social work department at all?
Yeah, she was actually my professor when I went there as a student.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I may have presented with cohorts.
Yeah, Chrissy's great. So that's kind of my connection to news. But one thing that I think I took away from the video, something that stuck out to me, was this idea of like generational trauma. There was a survivor who mentioned that they, to the day that they were doing the interview, could not, understand why their mother hadn't done anything about the abuse that she knew was happening. And that just made my mind kind of think about, I wonder what that individual as a mother, earlier in their life had experienced to make them have that sort of reaction to knowing that their child was going through an instance like that. And that's just kind of where my mind went.
That's a fantastic insight. Did anyone else's mind go there? Anyone think of intergenerational trauma?
Or what she was going through at that moment too, like, I wasn't necessarily thinking of one or the other, just that she obviously was going through something.
Yeah, she has a story too.
Yeah.
Whatever that story is. Our parents have stories, our aunts and uncles have stories, our neighbors have stories. Everyone has a story. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There are two other folks. Are you in the space? Okay.
I can go next.
Sure.
My name's Irene, and I got drawn to news because I was a co-speaker with one of the news employees, China, at the American Canyon Seroptimists. We were both speakers for that women's group, and I was drawn to her because of her personal history with violence. And sitting around the room, the population had a group of Pacific Islanders or Asians. And to me, I was even more drawn to news because culturally, we might not even recognize that abuse is taking place in our culture because it's so prominent. Male dominance, submissive women, and it might be subtle to the point where we think it's acceptable. So I'm here to learn a little bit more about how violence presents itself. There's different degrees of violence, right? And to also be an advocate for not only my culture, but my generation and women out there. So from the video, that's what I got, is that sometimes abuse is not as clear cut as we think it is, and it comes in many different layers.
Okay. That's also a wonderful insight. And I couldn't agree more. And the cultural components are very important, right? They're important in engaging families and engaging survivors, right? And understanding why for some people don't hear it, or some people normalize it, right? And being
Right.
able to withdraw judgment, to be able to be curious and help people throughout a spectrum of their own ability to recognize and articulate what is or what is not violence. So I really appreciate that. We have one more gentleman up there.
Gentleman, huh? That's
Now I'm taking guesses.
well, thank you. So I kind of was thinking about your last statement before you started the video about how your comment about failure, and I'm thinking about how relapse is part of treatment, which is so important to me because it's two steps forward, one step back sometimes. But the video, I'll be honest, I kind of have a hard time getting emotionally connected to the stories. I kind of protect myself when I hear those things because just the people that are around me and that I love have experienced that, and it's just a little bit too much for me sometimes to handle at the end of a long day. So that, and how did I get drawn to this? I work with Alexis at Pacific Union College. I'm the supervisor of the grant, and this is something that we want to expand our offering and our services to students. So that's why I'm here, is to learn more and to expand my knowledge and my understanding, and to help others.
That's awesome. I appreciate you being here. I had an opportunity, Chrissy invited me a couple of times to speak to the colloquium when you brought classes together, and I'm always impressed with the students at PC. They ask a lot of really good questions and aren't just sort of sitting there, right? They're really involved and invested in the learning process, and I always enjoy going up there. So I'm glad you're both here with us today.
Thank you for that feedback, and we'll have to invite you again.
Please, I love it.
Yeah.
So would my partners, they love speaking too.
Okay.
And Christy is good friends with we all worked in probation together. I don't know if he's still up there or not, but we were all probation officers together.
I think Christy went back to that population recently.
I think she's working with, she's actually doing sex offender treatment, I believe,
Yeah.
with Christy Blunt.
That's a tough group to work with. So
it is a tough group.
Yeah.
I remember when I supervised the juvenile sex offender caseload at probation for a good couple of years, and my son, I have two children, they're now 15 and 11. At the time I had one child and he was 2, and we were starting to look at daycares, and one of the perpetrators was a child of a daycare operator who used some of the kids there. No longer an operable daycare for folks that were, so everyone knows safety wise. But I remember reading through the police reports, and as a 30-something-year-old man at the time, approaching 50 now, I walked into my supervisor's office just absolutely in tears. He said, I can't do this. I can't. I'm still, like, I come into contact with it now, and when I say it out loud, I can't do it. And then I met them, right? And I learned their stories. And most of them were victims themselves.
Absolutely.
And most of them were enacting a power dynamic in situations where they were consistently disempowered and victimized. And suddenly I realized that there's more to this story, right? And not to diminish or minimize victims' experiences in any way, because the behaviors that they perpetrated were terrible to the survivors, and were terrible to the survivors' families, right? And getting into contact with their stories changed the way that I view a lot of different things, and helped me learn in practice to withdraw the judgment. Now, if that was my son, judgment would be there, right? And I would be fuel on fire, right? And very angry, and would be very vocal about that and advocating for my child's rights. As a professional, I could take a step back and say, these folks have stories too, right? So you're going to be working with lots of different people who have lots of different perspectives when it comes to their own ability to hold what they're seeing, what's happening in front of them. Okay. So we kind of touched on it. I tried to do as much of a list as I could, and I know that I missed a lot of things. But what do you notice about the list? If there's anything that kind of jumps out at you.
Could you read the list out for us? Those of us
I
on Zoom cannot read that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It says it says generational trauma. Prevalence.
Mark?
Yes.
Could you have maybe Michael take a photo of it and post it in the chat? That would be really helpful.
I can. I don't know if you're going to be able to read it, because penmanship is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Like, we're putting to work.
Yeah.
Start typing, Mitchell.
Yeah, exactly.
He's gonna take a picture and post it.
Forgot it. I'm not typing that fast.
And I'm gonna read it out loud, okay?
Thank you.
Generational trauma, the prevalence of it, how often it occurs, right? Spelled correctly, I might add. The brain, lived experience, survivor, resiliency, with a big question mark, right? So the word resiliency was and I'll use the word trigger, the trigger, right? It created an emotional response in an individual. Early intervention, early treatment, what might be unconscious, The content is relatable. Acknowledge forgiveness, letting go of shame I wrote forgiveness twice. You don't have to write forgiveness twice.
I think it was forgiveness for self and then forgiveness to the program.
Thank you so much. Look at the engagement here. Remember exactly what it's said. Forgiveness to the cultural responsivity. Relapse is a part of treatment, right? Which for the person using drugs is understandable. For the person perpetrating violence might be less understandable to the people who that violence affects. That might be true with drugs too, or is true with drugs too. Protect against emotional investment, giving back. I kind of wrote some of the things that were motivating factors. So given that list, what jumps off the page at you? And it may, what I'm trying to get at may not jump off the page, and that's okay.
Not one particular word jumps out at me, but when I look at all the words collectively as I'm reading it in the chat, to me, the word cycle comes to mind. That it's repetitive, that it's a learned cycle, it's a learned behavior, and you learn to adapt because that's all you know, and that's what you see repeatedly. So you carry that on subconsciously. And then the next generation of victims, eventually they take it on. So that's what I see.
I appreciate how you took a step back and looked at the totality of words and drew upon what your response was for that. I wrote down cycle, learning, behavior, adaptation. I really appreciate that. Anyone else? Are these intellectualized words or are they feeling words?
I would
Someone
say
said
intellectualized.
Yeah. They're very intellectual. Right? We're thinking, they're cognitions, we're saying we're critically thinking, right? Where was movement in the room? I know, I'm asking these weird questions. A couple of different things happened in the room. I don't want to put a spotlight onto any one person because it's not just one person. Several people had some emotional responses. I'm guessing you did in the smile actually early on.
Yeah, it's a nervous smile.
Yeah, right. We had a tearful response to a personal disclosure. Right. We had an emotional response, a trigger response to the word resiliency. A lot of the time when we show this video in rooms like this, people start to develop treatment plans and say them out loud in these types of trainings. Well, this is what I do. Well, we got to get that kid out of that house, you know, and you get right into sort of fix it mode, right? But given the context of the training today, which is about vicarious trauma, what do you think I'm getting at?
Or living vicariously. Right? I felt like the video was just too fast, so that we couldn't get tied or emotionally pulled in too much. It was just, you really couldn't try to fix anyone because you were just, you know, you were learning about the neighborhoods, the gangs, the sexual trauma, the this, the that, the these. You're like, whoa, right? Okay.
Yeah, it moves fast.
Yeah.
I hope that you're not hearing judgment as though you should have had a specific response
No.
or anything like that. The work tends to be intellectualized for a lot of people. You know, I forget the name. I'm not wearing glasses. Michael. Oh, did Yuri go?
No, I think he's in chair.
Is she in space? I thought that.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, she's in.
I'm so sorry. It's hard to tell everyone on the Zoom from where I was standing, and I.
Don't worry.
Might have been, it might have been something that you appreciated. She's like, yeah, it skipped me. Calling me again.
I was like, yeah, no, it's all right. What drew me into this, well, one, I wanted to take this training like 10 years ago, but I never did. But it was really the word that keeps getting from the video, generational trauma. I come from a household with an alcoholic father, and his dad was alcoholic, so it's really kind of my daughter in wanting to break that cycle, that generational trauma that my family tends to carry, and how I can, it's like I'm healing myself as I'm being a mother to her. So that's really also what, it's okay, Mama, it's okay. Were you on the phone? So that's really why, like, I'm just drawn to this work, just because of experience with an alcoholic father, my mom not wanting to use her voice, and just the emotional abuse that comes with it. And being like, oh no, it's fine. Like, Papa no toma, you know, he doesn't drink. And I'm like, yes, he does. He has a problem. I mean, he's sober now, 20 years plus, but still, it's there's anxiety. Like the video said, like we develop anxiety. And yeah, I have anxiety, unfortunately. I get triggered and it's like, okay, let me learn more of why that happens and how I can kind of reframe my brain to no longer be triggered. But yeah, hopefully you were able to hear me with the little one yapping away.
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad that you spoke. Are you kidding me? Yeah, we can hear you. Everything that you said is the trajectory that I wanted to take this conversation. So I'm so glad that I noticed that I didn't call on you. That's amazing. Breaking the cycle, healing myself, what that looks like, wanting to understand how to do that, what that means, right? And one of the reasons why it's important to talk about, especially on the front end of coming into a field like this, is because sometimes if you come in without engaging in your own personal work, the work can be incredibly re-traumatizing, right? And our need to actually take care of ourselves within that becomes really important. Really, really important. So before I was kind of going back and forth between the difference between being intellectualized or feelings based. I'm going to draw in the middle because really the sweet spot is right there where you kind of come into contact and can think through something through. I actually have the tattoo of the gentleman holding the head and the heart in balance, something that's important to me, and why I don't have a PowerPoint. Because a lot of the time trainings on vicarious trauma are very intellectualized. You know, like I can tell you about trauma in the brain, right? And how trauma gets stored in the part of the brain that holds short-term memory, right? So symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and we'll get into that. One of them is having flashbacks, right? And the science behind that is it hasn't worked itself into the part of the brain that holds longer term memory. So it's like it all just happened, right? And trauma work gets that to move to the part of the brain that holds long-term memory. So it feels like it's further in the past. So people who do things like EMDR, has anyone ever heard of EMDR? Eye movement, desensitization, rapidity, or something like that. I should know it, I'm trained in it. It involves tapping. It involves bilateral movement, or what they call bilateral stimulation. Did you see what, Yerli, is that your name? Am I pronouncing it correctly? Am I pronouncing it
Yes.
correctly? Did you see what she was doing while she was holding her baby? Let it stand still.
No.
Right? She's rocking, she's moving back and forth, right? There's a reason why that calms. Years after I and my wife had our children, I would find myself doing training, still doing it. And I started to take note. I'm doing it when I'm anxious. I'm doing it when I'm starting to go, oh no, I'm losing the room. Oh no, she's laughing at me. You know, oh no, I upset her. Oh no, she just got really emotional. What are we gonna do with that in the room? Right? Like, oh, okay, I start to kind of rock back and forth. And then they also do eye movement. So you actually like move your eyes. And as someone who participated in it and who has done it, it's a wonderful trauma modality. If you ever want to work with a therapist, I would recommend looking for an EMDR therapist. Why did I bring that up? None of you know.
For that middle ground.
It's only for me. Yeah, the middle ground. Yeah, thank you. The middle ground is exactly kind of where we want to lay, right? So when we hear things like trauma in the brain, these intellectualized trainings, I just did a very abridged little 2-minute presentation on EMDR, trauma in the brain. I didn't tell you what parts of the brain because I would need a PowerPoint to be able to do that effectively. And a lot of people who do trauma trainings, that's true too, right? You would talk about maybe the symptoms of PTSD, and we are gonna actually go over those here in a few minutes. You would talk about, has anyone else done trauma trainings? I know people in this room have done trauma training before. Nobody? Oh, wow, okay. You have? What are they usually like?
Intense.
Yeah.
Pretty intense.
Uh-huh.
I mean, very detailed, a lot of information.
A lot of information. Do you retain the information? I want to tell a probation officer story really quick. I won't mention the person's name, Ken. We had someone who came in high on marijuana. Actually legal at the time. Guy actually got a 215 card from a judge who okayed it. And Ken, excuse me, the unnamed PO, who I know some of you have met. I think he's come in and done some trainings for you. Great guy. He was doing the NSID caseload at the time. He was a narc, right? So they went to get him as a drug expert, and he was literally like kind of over this person. Don't you know the federal law? And you know, then you can do this, and yeah, but you can still get arrested. And it was kind of going over all this, and lectured him for, I swear to God, 45 minutes. And I'm sitting at the queue, and we're kind of like, oh. And when the probationer left, I went in and I sat in the chair and I said to him, same exact thing you just said. The only thing that dude remembers is that guy was so intense. And then he got up and left. Doesn't remember a thing, doesn't remember the thing that he said. You know, and I found myself kind of responding to trauma trainings the same way. Like I would have a felt experience of it being heavy. And then kind of everyone at the end would take a couple minutes, like, oh, what do you do to take care of yourself? I go for walks on the beach. That's the new thing. I play baseball. You know, and then you kind of everyone breaks and goes away and goes about their business. And there's nothing wrong with those trainings. But what I find is lacking in trauma training, vicarious trauma, is how we're actually affected by the work. Right? And we tend to intellectualize things that happen that we see in the video, right? And when we start to come into contact with an emotional response to it, what happens?
fall apart.
Or we try to stop it.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Knock that off, man, I'm starting to feel something. And I'm starting to have this response to it, right? Now, I'm withdrawing the judgment of that, okay? There's nothing inherently wrong with that. And in fact, being able to recognize when that's coming and being able to hone it can make you much more effective in the work that you do. Because it's not helpful when you're sitting face to face with a survivor to suddenly fall apart and put them into a position to take care of you, right? And that can and does happen. At the same time, what do we do with that? Right? We learn from the work that we do that if you ignore it, what happens?
Festers.
It festers. What happens when it festers?
It comes out at an inappropriate time.
It comes out at an inappropriate time. If we don't reflect, we project. You know, suddenly we come home and we're angry and we're saying something we didn't mean to say to our partners. We're telling a client too much of our own story at a time when their story is what we're there for, right? And there's a difference between coming into contact and sharing an experience, and there's from like, yeah, that same thing happened to me. Let me tell you. You know what I did? You know, sometimes that isn't very helpful at all, right? So if we can take what we learn intellectually, and I'm glad that you guys will have a PowerPoint later, so you can see some of that, you know, some of the actual nuts and bolts of trauma training. Are there any questions that come up in the comment section, do you know?
No, well, Michael said, I think intellectualization kind of training is a way of protecting the participants so that they can survive a 6-hour conference. Those have been difficult days.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
You sort of answered it, but I'll ask it. So if, as volunteers, if the person we're trying to help triggers our trauma, does that make us good candidates to be a volunteer?
Yes.
Hmm.
If you're taking care of that and working on it somewhere. Okay, so in my field, we have expectations of clinical supervision in order to become licensed. So we're working with someone who's talking to us about those very things. One of the reasons why I love coming to news is when I was working in an outpatient clinic, an outpatient mental health clinic, I would find myself wanting to cry every time I assessed a C-Tech youth. And they were K youth, so they're typically people in their early 20s. Do you guys know C-Tech? When I say that, commercially sexually exploited. So youth who've been sexually exploited. Whether by an individual or by a bigger system of exploitation. And it's pretty prevalent in Solano County. It's here too. It's here in Napa County too. And I would go to my boss and it's like every time I assess, I want to cry. And I find myself coming into contact with that experience every time. And it'll slip out. You know, and as an early clinician, and I felt like I was doing something wrong. I can't do that. I can't cry in there. And a wonderful supervisor who said, he was curious, let's explore that. You know, what do you think that's about? You know, and there was just something about the victimization of somebody who was at risk. Just made me so sad. I wasn't even angry at perpetrators. Like my felt experience was a sadness for them, right? Which isn't always helpful, right? To the other person, if every time, you know, they talk about important parts of their story, you would cry. right? So I had to take that and bring it to supervision. At the time, I was also in therapy. I've been in and out of therapy for my life. And I would take it there. Okay, here's what's happening. You know, okay, let's explore it. There's a curiosity to it. So you're kind of alive in your own process. Right? When you hear, does anybody need a bio break or anything like that? I know we've been going for a little while. Adult learning is usually.
No, we usually take one at 6:50, it's like 6:44, something like that. You go now.
You're at a tight shift. I'm gonna leave this on the board. I'm gonna sit down, when we come back, we're gonna have a roundtable conversation about actual vicarious trauma. That just seems like a natural breaking point. So how long do you usually take?
10 minutes.
Maybe 10 minutes. I'm done.
I want to leave now.
Did you see, we didn't even wait for you this time, you just want to get a name.
Oh, I know. I know, that's what I did tell her, I said, no, go ahead. It's okay. If you want.
Yeah, that sounds.
I've already had you.
I'm sorry. It looked like I was not.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
I could be smaller.
Okay. So like 4:30 and I was like, it's so hard. I've done it for like 30 days. But it is a struggle. I do like the 30 days.
Right. Your perspective before.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
And all right.
All.
All right now, thanks.
And then they leave. And when they leave, this is gonna seem out of context. And you have it for a couple minutes. Whenever you leave there. And then when they leave work, they don't, and go home, they don't remember their work at all. But what they do remember is that they've been separate. So they know that when they're at home, they don't remember work, and they know when they're at work, they don't remember.
Yeah, it's some odd comments, but it's supposed to be a great show.
Oh, it's fascinating show. And it leads to all sorts of problems, I'm sure that you guys could imagine if you haven't seen the show. But we're not like that. We're human beings. We carry with us our stories, our narratives, our emotional beings wherever we go, and we learn how to manage within those systems. The issue with systems like this, a lot of the time, when you do have lived experience, is being able to know when something is being constellated and understand what to do in those situations for yourself. And there's no prescriptive answer to that. If you just go for a 10-minute walk, you will no longer be personally affected by that individual who has a very similar story to you, or is so reminding you of you. Anyone who has kids knows that when you're getting into it with a kid, it's probably 9 times out of 10 because they're being a lot like you. That's true for me and my children. I'm like, oh, that's what people mean when they said that to me. You know, now I get it. So I'm curious, just from your all's lived experience as human beings, not necessarily lived experience with trauma or with abuse, but just as human beings, when you hear vicarious trauma, and I heard you respond to this earlier, but maybe just a little bit more, like what do you think that means?
feeling what that other person is feeling at that time.
Yeah. So maybe in a more heightened way than, because that would also be a really wonderful description of empathy, right? Being able to have a feeling space that connects to someone else's experience, right?
Sorry.
No apologies.
But I have a question about empathy. Because I'm reading this book by Brene Brown right now that is hugely popular, and she talks about empathy. And she had said that, bringing up your lived experience as a way of connecting with the other person is sometimes a good way of doing it. And to me, I've never found that to be the truth, because when I'm going through something and I express that to somebody else and they say, oh, I know how you feel. That's like the last thing I want to hear is you know how to, because you don't exactly know how I'm feeling. And I don't want this to be about you. I'm trying to tell you my story. Like, it's great that to me, that's like the wrong thing to say.
Yeah. Now, if I responded, having done my own personal work, I have some experience that's similar. Would it be helpful if I shared that with you?
Well, it's nice that you're asking me rather than telling me the story about you. Yeah.
So it's like anything else. A lot of the time, the motivation behind it is part and parcel of what makes for your response to it, right? Like I remember, so I have a brother who died by suicide in 1994. Right? He's 24 years old. And I remember this one guy who I had done a lot of drugs with back in the day. Or at that moment back then, I was 19 years old at the time, right? And he had come up to me and he did one of these. Do you mind if are you okay with this? He just came in, he goes, hey brother, like, hey man, I know, I'm sorry to hear what happened to your brother, Grateful Dead, jump your call, right?
Yeah,
Like I see it. I've seen it look in your eyes, man, you're gonna be good, you're gonna be all right, brother, it's good to see you. And he walked away, and I can tell you, if I had never,
because the people come to me like that, going through some experiences, and I didn't appreciate it. And it took every ounce of me to not weigh on that.
Right.
And that's what I was just about to say. I've never wanted to punch another human being in my life other than that time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, and I just looked at him and I said, fuck off. And I walked away, and then I was the jerk, right?
Right.
And I didn't handle it appropriately. Admittedly, that was not the appropriate thing to say in response to it. But what was he trying to do?
To make light of it, to make it seem like it wasn't.
Why do you think that's the case?
It makes him uncomfortable.
It makes him uncomfortable. He's managing his own discomfort. And for anyone who's had any traumatic experience, it makes other people uncomfortable. They don't know how to respond to it. They don't know how to look at you and say, I don't know what to say. But I'll tell you what, during that time, the people that I really had clear memories for, that's exactly what they said. I don't even know what to say to you right now, dude. And just be here. We go for a walk. Or there was a sociology teacher at the junior college, Mr. Lehman. This was years ago. I have no idea what happened to that guy. He spoke with a lisp and was very loud. And he was really loved my brother. He took his classes before me, before I did. And he would do an annual trip to the desert. Who knows what the hell they're doing in the desert, but they would go to the desert. I'm sure they were experimenting with some things. I'll just say that much. And that's what he said. Oh yeah, your brother died. And he just, but unabashed, just no reservation at all. He just talked about it. Oh yeah, he died. I know he had, and I'm okay with disclosure. I've done years of therapy, so if it makes anyone uncomfortable, please let me know and I'll back off it a little bit. But he had attempted suicide by overdose like a month before he actually died by what we consider suicide. But at the time, he went to Goat Rock Beach, which has really dangerous waves and it tells you not to go into the water. So like there's different takes within my family, and some people accept it as suicide, some people don't. But he got his took his clothes off, did a tribal dance, and went into the ocean. And that was his moment. And he died. What was I going for when I started telling this? I lost my train of thought. Thank you. And he says that teacher, he goes, you know, it went in the ocean and his neck just broke like that. It was like a cook. And
Wow.
but he was saying it so matter of fact. I loved it.
Oh, you did?
I did. Because he was so unafraid to talk to me about something that everyone else was afraid to talk to me about. You know, and everyone else was dancing on eggshells. And here's this person who's passed through that. And he's just very matter of fact. That must be very hard. It's very hard. I love you, brother. I'm doing a horrible job of it. You know, but at the time, and he really is like that. He's very animated and very big. If I ever gave him a book answer to a question, he would get pissed. Close your book. You know, because he was just so excited about that. So a lot of people who come into this field enter through a wound. A lot. Not all, and not everyone has to. Not everyone has to have the same experience to be productive and helpful. You can have very different experiences and be productive and helpful. I always like to look at it, you know, the sort of iceberg picture that people have in describing the unconscious. Or we did an MI, the behavior, and then what happens underneath the water that kind of comes to the behavior, right? You might not know what it's like to be abused or to be assaulted or to be, but you may in other ways, and not totally equating it, know what it's like to feel powerless, or know what it's like to not have an answer, or know what it's like to be afraid to ask for help, or to be confused because you're having really, really, really negative feelings about somebody that you really, really love, right? And that's a tough one, especially in the world that you're all in, right? It's not so cut and dry as good, bad, and evil, good, you know, whatever. There's a huge dynamic mix of all of that, right? And people get caught up in that. And it's hard to change, regardless of where you're, it's hard to change. And it's hard to get out of situations if you don't know anything else. And at your heart, you love the person, regardless of anything else, and regardless of other people's judgments about that. Right? And it's not safe to leave them. And you know where else to go. Right? And that's where you are. Right? So you can have a moment, and who's been doing the work for a while? You said that you've been working for a couple of years.
No, just not all that long. Just a few months.
A few months. You know, you'll be in it.
But I hear that
Yeah.
you're hitting.
And you'll be in it.
Yeah.
You'll be like, oh, they're getting it. You know, oh, we got them placed in this house. Oh, they're safe. Oh, they got into therapy. Oh man, they're entering into rehab. You know, and doing an outpatient program for their drug use. I'm so excited. Go away on a Friday, come back on Monday. I'm back in the house. You know, they've left their residential program. They're back in the house with the perpetrators, right? You're gonna see that. And there's gonna be a roller coaster aspect of the work that will affect you, because as fixers, or as people who want to see people being healthy and doing well, you get caught up on that run, right? And vicariously, so vicarious just means that I am experiencing something through this other person, right? Like I experienced, oh, there are gonna be some moms who give me some dirty looks after this. I experienced the birth of my children through my wife. Very different than her experience. not trying to equate it, right? I had a vicarious experience of that. I was scared to death. Right? I was emotionally a mess. I was crying. I was his emergency C-section. She gets, pulled away. And then at the end of it, I'm holding this beautiful thing. Right? This beautiful boy with this crazy hair. Like, did I give birth to him? Absolutely not. Did I have a vicarious experience? Absolutely I did. Right? And that's gonna happen when you are doing this type of work. So it's easy when I ask you a direct question and then you give a direct disclosure, right? Like what happened earlier. It's different if you're just sitting in a space with someone who has a very similar experience and they're telling you a story that's very similar to your own. And in your head, you're having the thoughts that you're having, whatever those thoughts are, which are not always about the other person, right? Does anybody have like a lived experience of that, where someone is like, you're in a counseling relationship or you're in a help relationship and you're thinking about yourself? I have.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I have.
And I kind of start changing a little.
Yeah. Okay, are you willing to talk about that a little bit?
I mean, I can't think of anything specific, but.
Y'all know
I
me.
had some experience that, and then I kind of, like, what did you just say? Kind of space out a little bit.
Yeah. And how about you? Your experience?
Oh, yeah, just the other day, one of my clients was talking about how her son is looking at her and blaming her for certain things, and I'm like, oh my God, thinking of my daughter, like, it took me back a couple of years, and I'm like, okay, bring yourself back, stop, And it felt good though to be able to tell her to come from a position of like, it's gonna get better. I didn't want to tell her, oh, I've been there, or he's gonna understand. This is how it is, it's temporary. Those looks are temporary. Just remind them that you love them. It's easy to react when they look at you like that, or when they complain. I had to readjust myself and come from a different place because I was losing myself. Like, I remember that. And it took years to get over that with my daughter. But I had to pull myself back, and I did really well. And I just, I told her, because when somebody had given me great advice, and it was, don't nitpick with them. Don't come down to their level. Don't keep fighting. Put your arms around her, tell her you love her, and walk away. Because, oh my God, that little girl would be little me. She was, it was similar. So I told her that same advice that this woman had given me, I gave her, and I felt good. So
it feels good.
Yeah,
from you right now.
Yeah.
And you came into contact with some emotion telling the story.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So when we hold, that emotion becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Right?
Yeah.
So I hasten because I want to ask you questions, but I also don't want to put you a spotlight on you. But have you told that story a lot? Or disclosed it a lot?
Yeah.
And there's more visceral, and I'm not telling you that people use the term like trauma dump or whatever, like there are appropriate avenues to do your own reflective work. Like I would recommend therapy. I'm a therapist, it's just who I am. So I always recommend it as something that helps talk through some of the stuff. Or if you still have contact with old, you talked about lived experience and being with news, if you still have contacts you can talk to, I'm imagining somewhere you probably do. Maybe even work side by side with them, or you're doing your own reflective work. What's the supervision here look like?
Will be like me and then like another staff member, basically. So someone else from just like on different departments, like they'll be from Tracy's been in here, Anna's been in here. So everyone from each different department that comes in here, type of thing.
Yeah.
And they'll either be kind of in a supervision state, or they'll pretty much talk about like what they do for news and then like that ties to the agenda.
Yeah. So you do all of that processing as a group
Right,
and not necessarily do like individual.
right, yeah. As a group.
Yeah, which there's powerful, we'll talk about community care.
Yeah.
It's important, a lot of the time people feel isolated in their, like even the whole term self-care, you know, you're solely responsible for all this stuff that's constant all around. I don't want to ignore the folks on Zoom. Do you have anything to add or anything that you're thinking in this moment? Or are you cooking dinner and soaking your feet or something? Was that like to be doing?
Nothing to add, but I am listening.
Okay, I believe it. I want to make sure that you have the ability to chime in and we don't ignore you outright. Does anybody in the room or on Zoom, who are also in the room, but on Zoom in the room, know what the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder are?
That's insomnia, anxiety, depression. I don't know if isolation is necessarily a symptom, but.
Flashbacks.
Intrusive thoughts, I think.
Intrusive thoughts. We heard you on Zoom, it's on the board. Oh, I'm gonna add to agitation, irritable or explosive outbursts. Did I miss any? I know there were a couple things.
Did you want to add anything?
Nightmares.
Did anyone mention to like trouble concentrating?
Trouble focusing, and then I'll add concentrating. Does anyone know what the term hypervigilance means? Exaggerated.
Yeah, being on alert for everything all the time.
Yeah. They actually train. Does anybody work side by side with law enforcement in here? No. No one works side by side with law enforcement. Law enforcement actually trains to be hypervigilant.
Yeah.
Told that if you know you're if you get killed, I like to say this because I did the trainings. Basically, if you die, it's your fault. You're not being hypervigilant enough or not paying attention to what's going on around you. Michael, you raise your hand.
Yeah. I think. Did you mention sleep?
We have insomnia up here.
Okay, good. Because I think this is so important. I have an aunt that was a psychologist and working for the military, the Air Force specifically, and she was specializing in PTSD, and she developed PTSD working with individuals struggling with PTSD, and now she's on disability. So we need to take care of ourselves and be really intentional about that. So thank you so much for what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what this is, right? We're talking about vicarious trauma, and that's exactly what you're explaining.
Yeah.
Right? We're present to these stories all the time, and we're seeing what people are going through all the time. And we're not necessarily engaged in our own process, and sometimes even if we are engaged in our own process, it will have effects on us. You know, and I don't say these things to like scare people out of here. I say it because it's just a reality. You know, so when I put these up here, right, let's see if I got them all. Oh, there's one big one, avoidance. Someone used the term isolation, but like avoidance. Like I'm gonna tell a really innocuous, silly story. When I was a kid, We used to torture this older man who lived on the corner by doorbell ditching him all the time. We were dicks. Just gonna say that out loud, excuse my language. And one day, I remember I went up to ring that guy's doorbell. And his door flew open. He was waiting for me. And he says, "You little shit, you're never gonna do this again." And I take off running. And he takes off running after me.
Oh, man.
And I'm not a runner. Still not. And I ran and ran and ran. And finally went around a corner and dove in a bush. And he ran past me. I am not joking. I did not walk on that side of the street on the block for 2 years. I was so scared of that guy. You avoid, people have trauma, they will avoid talking about it, they will avoid the spaces where things happen. They will avoid the smells, they will avoid a lot of different things around the trauma. And this can be a really, really good protective factor that in time can keep you detached from having healthy relationships and growing. There's a really cool dude. A depth psychologist by the name of Donald Kalshet, who talks about he calls it the archetypal self-care system. I would recommend looking him up. I like the depth psychologists in the Jungian tradition, Carl Jung, because they talk about psychology in a way that's similar to how people talk about mythology or spirituality, things of that nature. And what he talks about is that oftentimes people who have trauma will engage in a fantasy relationship with something. And that fantasy relationship is both protective and also pathological. And what I mean by pathological probably isn't the right word, I'm gonna stay with it, is that it adversely affects their ability to come into contact with other people. A really good example of that is Good Will Hunting in stories. Has everyone in the room seen Good Will Hunting? Okay. So what is his fantasy relationship with?
The therapist or the
Matt Damon's character.
oh, not even, oh, okay. Oh, he's super smart, so, yeah.
Keep on with that. Yes. He's super smart.
Yeah, so.
What is he smart at?
Mathematics.
Right? He has his fantasy relationship with mathematics. Right? He can be better than everyone else. He can be smarter than everyone else. And he plays that out over time. And it also keeps him separated from even his closest friends, right? And his ability to have a relationship. Now that's Hollywoodized, obviously, but that's one example of what we would call the archetypal self-care system. You see a lot of young boys who have a significant trauma history become really fascinated with role-playing games. Not everyone. There are plenty of people who play role-playing games who don't have trauma, but you do see a lot of people who do have some relationship with something that protects them, makes them feel good, and keeps them separated from other people. Drugs and alcohol, right, are something that solve a problem initially and then develop into a bigger problem. So that would be the archetypal self-care system. Has anyone ever felt this type of stuff at work? Working with the population? You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Yeah, all the time. Right? I know that's not easy to say. Right? There's a reason why I wear golf shirts. You can't see them sweating from ear to ear. And it's true. And I have a lot of anxiety that always surprises people. Because they don't perceive that to be the case. Right? And that happens, especially when you're sitting down doing the work. Okay, so you want to pay attention to these types of things. These are the symptoms of PTSD, and like Michael pointed out with who was the family member, Michael? Your aunt?
Yeah, my aunt, she was a psychologist, and it's sad because you spend how many years training, so yeah.
So like we were talking about earlier, the difference between intellectualization and feelings, right? Oftentimes we talk when we're trained to become clinicians, when we're trained to become counselors, when we're trained to become psychologists, psychiatrists, that there's this blank slate, we have a knowledge base, and I'm gonna fix you. See, yeah, I laugh at someone who said that to me too. Who are you fixing? You know, you're not fixing anybody, who are you? You know, where we learn all this information. We learn about Pavlov, we learn about hierarchy of needs. We learn about, crisis intervention and all this stuff, but a lot of the time what's lacking is we don't learn about what happens to us amidst all that. Right? And what happens a lot of the time is people either become really disconnected from the work and kind of cold. And they're the kind of checkbox people who come in and punch their card in, punch their card out, and never want to talk about anything that's too deep, and kind of go into whatever their own silo is. And then the people who kind of burn out pretty quickly because they're just all in and it's going to solve all this. Oh no, they went back. They did what? They used again? No, we're going to do that. And become so over-invested in it. That's another trauma response. I forgot, over-investment. When it's just so important that person that they're working with does the thing, and you're like, you know what? I think that maybe you're not talking about that. Like maybe something's going on for you right now. Right? How do you move through that? These are the things to pay attention to. If you start finding yourself isolated, if you start finding what are signs of anxiety. That's a question for everyone. If I'm overthinking something. So do you have experience overthinking? Okay. Yeah, a lot of the time when we say we don't, right? Part of us. Do you know how to, or do you know when that's happening? Are you able to identify it? So that's the key, right? Sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're sitting there and you're kind of going through things, and some people go, oh wait, I'm overthinking. And some people keep on that loop. So the ability to recognize when it's happening becomes really important. What are some other signs of anxiety?
Increased heart rate. Yeah.
Increased heart rate. Has anyone done a home visit? No? Do you guys do home visits here?
No.
No.
Yeah, we do. Most of those.
Do you work with PD when they go out on DV calls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you're there in the thick of it.
And they'll be the.
Yeah, if they want to, yeah.
If you guys respond to when you guys, it's their choice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very much so.
So that's part of the role of being a volunteer and working and news is you may or may not And I'm guessing that you don't throw people into situations that they don't wanna do or they're uncomfortable with.
Right, yeah, that's why there's like, various volunteer opportunities and you do whatever you feel comfortable or whatever you feel like you can, best do to your ability. We don't wanna put anyone where they're gonna be triggered or they feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or anything like that, so that's why there's a choice.
Good.
Yeah, that is like our biggest need. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and say like,
Of course.
it would be nice to do that, but
Yeah.
you have a choice, you want to not.
Yeah. So I was a probation officer, like I said earlier, for 10 years. I'm a pretty liberal dude. I'm not gonna hide that, but pretend. I'm guessing y'all can kind of guess that anyway. And I remember kind of having a sort of political viewpoint and then going into a home where a cocaine deal went down a half hour before. And I remember looking around going, I am so thankful these mofos with guns are in this space right now and ready to help me, if whatever goes sideways. I still will have issues, but I won't get into too much of that right now. But the point being is that when you're in it, even when we train law enforcement, is to recognize that your heart rate is gonna go up. You're gonna feel your heart in your throat. You're gonna start to have some anxiety symptoms that you work at the state hospital. Have you ever been in a situation that felt like it might go sideways or was unsafe with somebody? Every day, all day, right? So you're one of the first people who said, yeah, I have these all the time, right? Especially in milieu-based places, especially when you're working with people who are have schizophrenia or have intensive bipolar 1 disorder with psychotic symptoms, who have a history of assault or have a history of doing something that is pretty egregious a lot of the time in order to end up there. People don't go to the state hospital anymore on misdemeanors. That ended last year. So everyone who's at the state hospital on what they call competency restoration typically has done something pretty egregious. Not just your sort of illegal camping, it's usually a lot more than that. Any other symptoms? Overinvestment. Am I thinking about all this stuff at 11 o'clock at night? Am I thinking about my client? Am I going back and forth between my client and my own experience? Is that causing me to struggle sleeping? Right? And these are ways that you can recognize within yourself when your trauma trigger is occurring, when you're having a vicarious trauma experience. There are other types of traumas: secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. There's one that I always forget the name of, and I will go through my PowerPoint and send it to you. There's one trauma where, and you actually spoke eloquently about this, and other people have too, where you go to the people who you're considering to be the safe people, and instead of taking care of you, you're re-traumatized. What are you talking about? He would never do that. Don't you ever talk about him like that again. He doesn't do that. Or that he was just drinking too much, just take care of your, just don't say anything, just make it worse. Right? I wish I could remember the trauma. Because what that does is it causes you to now not feel safe with other people, right? So now you're less likely to go tell someone else. And more limiting. Do you guys want to look at this at all? The folks on Zoom, do you have anything to add or anything that you want to say?
No.
No? Okay. I'm gonna erase the board so we're not distracted by it. Cause this is the hardest question, and I'm glad we have a little bit of time to go over it. Even though I said that we might be able to get out early. And people might be clock watching now that it's getting a little bit closer to 8, I know I would be. But I also get energized by this stuff. I love doing it. What do you do with all this? What do you do with it? Can I tell you how angry I get sometimes at the phrase self-care? You wanna know why? Anyone have a guess? No? Not one guess.
Because you have to rely, oh, go ahead. I was gonna say you have to rely on others as well, it's not just yourself.
Right? I wanna be taken care of, I don't wanna take care of myself.
Yeah.
What are you thinking of trauma bonding?
Trauma bonding is one.
Yeah.
I don't remember the context. I'm a little bit all over the map, and I came from 8 hours of working prior to coming here too. Can I try this? You right?
You were not, no, you're right, fine.
Like that? I like that. I told my staff today. Because we were talking about it in the mental health world, and any world where you bill, there's a term called productivity, where you want to make sure that half of your time is billable, because that's how programs sustain themselves. That bill insurance. I don't think that's true with news. I'm sure news has got various grants going on and all sorts of different funding streams, or get into contract with the police department, DA's office, all those other places. So money is kind of get funneled a different way, but there's this term called productivity. And basically what they are saying is that a certain amount of your time needs to be billed for. Now, I run a program in Solano County where the schools won't let us in. So in Napa County, the schools are really engaged with Aldea and let people into the schools. So we do pullouts, we can do groups on school campuses. So we have basically from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. to bill for time and bill for service, and to meet with young people and help them, right? In Solano County, my team can't meet with people, with kiddos during 8 a.m. to 3:30 unless they're 18 and aren't in school, because the schools won't let us do pullouts, right? So I can't come to them and say, hey, look, I'm noticing that your productivity is only 10%. You're only billing for this amount of time. You need to do something about that, right? The job is mine, because I gotta get into the schools to be able to give them an avenue, to be able to have the time to actually pull kids out, work with them. Otherwise, I'm telling people that they have to figure out how to get 20 hours of billable time between the hours of 3:30 and 5:30 Monday through Friday. It's not even 20 hours. You're not gonna see everybody. You have to have an avenue to be successful. The reason why I build it up is because a lot of the time, people's stuff that gets constellated is part of a bigger dynamic process, right? So if I'm telling that person who is at risk of, in some places, of losing a job because they're not billing enough to insurance, but I haven't given them the space to be able to do it, and they're having some sort of response to that, which is legit. They're probably fearful, they're probably angry, they're annoyed, all the things that come up with that. And my response to them is, well, what are you doing for self-care? Like, to me, I'm like, well, what the hell are you gonna do to get me into schools? That'll help me with self-care, because then I won't have to figure out how to get 20 hours of service into 12 hours of time. Doesn't make sense, right? We have to give people an opportunity to take care of themselves. right? So if I have a nice little quiet room where people can go and take a rest in an environment in which I don't ever give them the time to do it, the quiet room doesn't really mean anything. And then I'm putting the pressure on that individual to care for themselves during whatever time I'm not giving them to take care of themselves. I'm rambling a little bit, I understand that. Do you get where I'm kind of going with that? Right? In order to self-care, you have to have the time, you have to have the safety too, right? And the space too. Right? In order to do that successfully in organizations, you have to develop trauma-informed organizations that understand that. You have to walk the talk. You can't just tell people to self-care. You know, you can't say, hey, family is important, work-life family is important. And when they call and they say, hey, my dad just was diagnosed with cancer. You know, I gotta be with him today. Dude, you have 5 clients. What are you gonna do with them? You know, if that's my response, am I being trauma informed? No. If my response is, oh my God, we have so much going on, but you need to take care of yourself, I understand that. I'm not sure what we're gonna do though. You know, is that trauma informed? No. Because I'm leveling guilt. Even if that other part is true, oh my goodness, we have 5 clients, right? That becomes my job. Okay, I'm gonna have to call or try to find someone to see them, right? So in order to provide space to self-care, we have to have a community that acknowledges the importance of care within that community, right? So a lot of the time, these trauma trainings, they'll tell you like, okay, everyone go around and tell what you do to take care of yourself. Well, I can tell you that. I carry with me in my pocket, not my wallet. My chiropractor has told me to stop carrying it in my back pocket, so I took it out. But I carry with me little 2 little stones. One's a tiger's eye, one is a, can someone please tell me what it says?
An amethyst?
Thank you, an amethyst. Good apple.
That is good. It doesn't look purple at all to me. And for you.
And I'll, if I'm really upset or I'm really nervous or I'm really bored or whatever, you'll see me play with these. I'll take them out, I'll do this, this is my daily, one of my daily self-care things. We could go around the table and do that. Let's do it as a practice. Okay, we'll do that. It's what a lot of people do. I'm telling you, they're smiling. And it's got me thinking. What do you do for self-care?
Play video games.
So, what's your video game?
Right now I'm playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Vikings.
Nice. What's your device of choice? You an Xbox, PlayStation? Okay. Fantastic. Do you do that every day?
No, because then I spend too much time on there.
Okay. So your self-care has embedded in it the possibility to become over-invested. And then it becomes something that is not on the board anymore, but it's something that's no longer care. It's something that can become problematic. Okay, so you have to know that. Okay. What do you do for self-care?
Like go to the gym, play soccer.
Yeah, play soccer. What do you do at the gym? You a weightlifter? You
Yeah,
like
right
to-
now, yeah.
I mean, I probably didn't need that. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I swim.
Oh,
I
cool.
try to swim every morning, at least 5 times a week.
Oh, nice.
But that's just new, that's in the last month and a half.
What brought that about?
Well, I wanted to get healthier and I can really, I'm a big, so I pray a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I pray the creator, I have a different kind of belief system, that's very always a little bit different. But it helps me, I can pray in water. Yeah, I'm gonna get red now. Talking about it, but I connected. It was a different connection. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
I'm gonna cry, but it was a total different connection in the water.
Yeah. What do you think that's about?
I think it's life. Water is a big source of life, and I give it to it's just a blessing to be able to find my path, to be able to figure out that I need to be healthier, and that I can find it in a source of water that is such a big, influence on. I think we lose. Everyone has lost. Humanity has lost its ability to realize that water is such an important resource that we're losing.
Yeah. Even in mental health treatment, a lot of the time, like people who are having anxiety, people who are depressed, get in the shower, take a bath, come into contact with some water, cleanse yourself. So I love that. Thank you for sharing. A funny aside, my kids were in swimming for a little bit at Synergy. I don't know what it's called now. Active moments.
Yeah.
They were doing that for a while, pre-COVID. We haven't been back since COVID. But I decided that I was gonna try it once. I could barely make it laugh, and I lived it. And then he was just like, oh, okay, I'm going into the warm pool. I'll be in the hot tub. It's hard. Swimming's hard. It's whole body, it's breath, it's all of that connected to everything. Thank you.
I feel like my entire day is all about self-care. I feel very guilty saying that, but I mean, it is. I'm retired and like, it's very new. The retirement is very new. So I spend a lot of time just making myself feel good. I have my coffee, I go to the gym, I go shopping, I clean. I mean, none of these things sound all that fun, but to me, they make me happy. And
yeah,
I spend time with the dogs. I love to cook. I love to read.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I like your butterfly tattoo.
Thank you.
I have a butterfly. So it's very manly.
One that can also come with consequence, so I do it daily, which is shopping. I like to shop all the time. But other than that, I like to spend a lot of time with dogs.
What kind of dogs do you have? You also said dogs over here.
I have 2 German Belgians, and then I have a countryside mix.
I have an English bulldog and beagle, and my bulldog's my favorite.
We have a miniature dachshund and a golden retriever.
Oh.
The golden is my favorite.
Yeah.
The dachshund is my wife's favorite. And my wife is the dachshund's favorite too.
The golden meeting.
Yeah, the golden yeah. I had a chocolate lab at one point. It was like a puppy until the day she died, and it was just too much. Like I still love her, she was alive.
Gosh, you calm down and sleep.
Yeah.
No bark.
That's why we got the golden. One, we had 2 miniature dachshunds, and one of them passed away, and we wanted to get another dog, but we knew that the other dachshund was very territorial and so we researched dogs that get along with dachshunds, and Golden's was at the top of the list. Chill. Totally chill. Needy but chill. So we'll sit there and look at you, but won't sit there and like jump up on you and twirl around and come back and jump back up on you. Thank you for the self-care talk. Can you?
I like hiking.
Mm-hmm. How often do you get to do that?
I try to go every weekend.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah. At probation, we had a self-care training once, or a trauma training once, where the person showed videos of his trip to Aruba that no one in the room could afford to do. And it's fascinating. It's like, oh, how often do you do that, right? It's also important to have just like little daily practices, like little things that you can do. The folks on Zoom,
I'll go. Mine are little, like you were saying. So I like to wash my hands between clients and between important meetings. I find that ritual to be really helpful for me. I run 3 to 4 times a week for between 3.5 to 4 miles. That's very healthy for me. And I love shredding files. No, there's just something so therapeutic about shredding files at the so
Are you raging against the digital age?
I know. How are you going to erase a digital file after 7 years? I'm trying to figure that out. So that, and the little things, like at home, I like doing dishes because I find something that has a beginning and an end, a very definite beginning and an end, and you can see what that end looks like, and all the dishes are clean. Like folding laundry or doing laundry, I do all the laundry in our house. So that's really therapeutic. And I like working on my car. I hate taking my car to a mechanic. And I just like that, you have a beginning, there's something wrong, there's a problem, and you get that problem fixed, and then you call it a day. So those are the things I do for self-care.
If there's a problem, Michael will fix it.
No, I only fix my problems. I don't fix other people's problems.
I was hopeful that someone would say, check out the hook while my DJ revolves it. Thank you. Who else would like to go?
I can go next.
Sure.
I like cleaning. It gives me peace as well, and I can hear my own thoughts. I think this question was asked before by Michelle, and it reminds me of my grandmother who passed away over 10 years ago, but we used to clean a lot together. So I find some peace and calmness in cleaning. She used to always say cleanliness is close to godliness. So I feel closer to her when I clean. The other thing, I try to be proactive, and in the morning I manifest and meditate that I'm going to have a good day. And that seems to help a lot too. And lastly, if I'm really angry and I just need to let off some steam, I go to the gym. That seems to. So depending on my mood, those are my 3 go-tos.
Those are good go-tos to have. Thank you. We have 3 others. I can't see one of the names. I see Yerli and Alexa.
Yeah, I think Yerli said deep breathing when I wake up and taking walks with my little one. So that's not what Yerli said.
Yeah, deep breathing is really important. I'll talk about it a little bit after we get through all the folks. Anyone else?
I can go. So, like Yereli, I also like practicing doing deep breathing a lot. I tend to do that when I find my anxiety levels are rising. That helps a lot. But something that I just do regularly for self-care is I help TA a pottery class on our campus. And I find that even if I'm not like making my own pieces, even if I'm just helping students learn how to make their pieces and improve their skills, just having my hands in the clay is very physically grounding and also mentally grounding as well. I find myself, if I am making my own pieces, I can find that my mind just kind of goes blank a lot, which is really nice. And then also just taking walks in nature. That is also really peaceful and definitely helps like kind of reset my mood if I need help with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Do you have anyone else on there, Michelle?
No.
She's on twice.
Yeah, I was saying.
Oh, she's up there too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm taking notes on my laptop, but I'm following along on my phone because I'm moving around and making dinner.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's absolutely fine. I just got a little bit confused as to how many people it looked like, oh, another person joined us. So I'm glad about that. I'm not the best at self-care. I have to be really intentional about it. I don't often remember to do it, which is why I bring these. I put them right next to my bracelets, which are gifts from my children, and have my children's name on. So that's something I do. Walking the dogs is something that I do also, although I'm not very good at doing it regularly. Deep breathing is something that I practice regularly. I was a smoker for 20 years, not in a long time. So it took a long time to be able to start regulating my breath again and to breathe deep. So when I finally was able to get like a good long deep breath, it was like a celebration. And I've worked with my kids on that too. My son was a pitcher, he pitches for the for the JV team. I'll see him take his glove and he'll put it over his face. And I know that he's doing deep breathing. Doing his little diaphragm breathing. Does anybody, have I shown you guys this in MI training? Right here is a pressure point. Oh no. This is the stress related alleviating pressure point. So it's something that you can do, like it's a small gesture. So even when you're like talking to somebody, you can kind of just push that pressure point, not to the point where it hurts, but to the point where you can feel it. It's also supposed to be really good for migraines, and they teach it as a grounding technique in dialectical behavioral therapy and EMDR. Another thing you can do are butterfly hugs, which is that bilateral movement, or rocking, something like that. And then often what we don't talk about is community care. Because, and I'm I will come here anytime you ask. Paid for or not. This is not paid. This is a volunteer, and I'm happy to come for other volunteer groups, because I like this group a lot because people are just engaged and brave and share experience in a boundary way. So it's not, too uncontained, or doesn't leave me feeling like someone might be, at risk of getting too heightened or too upset when they leave. And two, you guys kind of give me what I would want to talk about anyway. So there's been sort of natural segues from one piece to another. Normally, I don't talk too much about self-care because I know other people do a lot, right? So it was brought up that you've asked this question before. So I'm going to ask one more question when we go around, and then we won't go all the way to 8:30. I can feel the energy. But it's
needed to stand.
It's all about you and your stand. I'm curious. I'm curious when you know that you need self-care. Like, how do you know?
When I know I haven't been taking care of myself, and I know, like, okay, you need to focus on. I don't feel as good inside.
What usually kind of brings you to that realization?
Just I get lethargic and I'm not as happy. And focused on, I guess, the future. I just feel like I'm kind of weighted down.
Okay, so you get a heavy feeling, you start to feel like there's stuckness, like you're not moving. Okay.
And I know if Irene wanted to, I don't know how to question.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I'm sorry, you were.
That was weird. She went away and then your phone buzzed.
Yeah, that was weird.
But when she comes back, if she comes back, she might have been raising her hand and saying, I'm out of here. I'm gone. Yeah,
I like it.
I know I need to do self-care when I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I can't fall back to sleep for half an hour to 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's a good one. I know I need self-care because I'll find myself not falling asleep at night. I'll be like, why am I up at 12:30? You know, oh, I haven't done anything I'm thinking about things. But sometimes it takes like something coming on the TV that's late. And I go, oh my God, I'm up for this. So let's shoot back on. Let's go ahead and go back.
Are you guys waiting for me?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay,
You had
sorry.
and you clicked off, so.
Yeah, for some reason it got disconnected. But I was gonna answer the question when I can't do my activities of daily living, when I can't get out of bed, or if I'm unable to make a decision, if I'm stuck on a decision, then that's when I know I need self-care.
Yeah, when you can't take care of your ADLs. So those are, and I'm not saying this is for you. It may or may not be, but those are depressive symptoms, right? When suddenly you're like struggling to get out of bed, or maybe, you know, my son won't shower for a couple of days. I'm still trying to determine if that's just his way of life. You know, it's like, hey, you have a shower. Oh, I didn't even think about it. You know, where you're kind of doing that. Yes, another hand raised. I don't remember.
Is that for me?
Yes, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. So for me, there's two main things that are big keys that tell me that I need some self-care. The first one is like if I am holding like my core tight throughout the day, I'll start feeling tension there. When my anxiety starts rising, that's where I hold those feelings. And so if I feel like my core start getting tight, I know that I need to do something about that. The other one is also if I'm just like my stress levels are rising in general, I will notice at the end of the day, I will try to like do something to like escape my reality. So if that's like binge watching a show or doom scrolling on Insta, something like that, that's a really good indicator that I did not take enough care of myself today or this week or whatever, and I need to start prioritizing me again.
I love that. That resonates with me because I'll find myself scrolling TikToks on Instagram. They're the same.
And way too late at night. That's always the key.
Yeah. And it goes by so quick because you can just keep going. It never stops.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Anyone else who hasn't come here?
For me, I'm always anxious, so when I am past my normal state of anxiety for consistent days, or when I find that I'm isolating myself for too, I guess more like depressed for 2 days.
Yeah.
I have to like, oh, you should probably put some glue on today.
Is that something that you become aware of yourself? Like for me, a lot of the time, my wife will be the mirror. She'll be like, "What the hell, dude?"
I learned to be aware of it, but when my sister isn't here for me, because I talk to her every day.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when she's like, are you okay? I haven't talked to you in a couple of days, and she'll kind of make me aware of it. But I've learned to be aware when I'm coming through those episodes.
Sure.
Because I used to stay in that place for a really long time, so I need to be more aware of it.
A lot of the time, what gets us to that awareness is a mirror somewhere. And a mirror is usually a trusted, safe person, whoever that is. So that's great. How about?
For me, it's when I'm starting to like shut down or overthink a lot at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really notice it when I start to like cry a lot. Like when something like as small as it can be like picks me off and I just start crying out loud instead of something small. And then I realize it's feelings that I've been bottled up and I don't realize it until that moment.
Yeah.
It's so small.
Do you ever come into contact with an awareness prior to crying?
Usually it's like when I can feel myself like hyperventilating, like my heart is beating like really, really fast. And usually it doesn't like it. But not really.
So you're welcome. Sometimes it's helpful along the way, right? Because we want to be careful, and I want to be honest with you about it. We want to be careful if our tells are when we're so dysregulated that it can be, troublesome, right? So we want to learn how to take care of ourselves, like you were talking about, right? Like it's one thing to be in a depressive state, and this is not about judgment. So this isn't about right or wrong or anything else. But it's harder to function when you're in that state for weeks, months at a time. So you have to kind of, get to a point where you're intentional. I think you used the word intentional earlier. And I liked it in the context that you were using it too. To know, okay, this is what's going on for me. So tend to, like, if you do that when you're anxious, kind of take stock of how many times have I been pulling the rocks out of my pocket today? Oh, a whole lot. Well, maybe I'm at this place. Maybe I need to talk to somebody, or maybe I need to journal or write a book or do whatever. Again, not as a judgment. I just want to make sure that we have tools that we can use that help us throughout the day, without it becoming too big to where it's harder to shift or to turn. So, guys, I said that in a weird way. You guys are very good. Thank you. It takes like this type of work for people to sustain it and to be healthy within it. You're gonna meet some really freaking cool people and people who are different, and you're gonna be in rooms with people who might never come together outside of these rooms if it weren't for these rooms. And how freaking cool is that? And you get to learn from people that you might never have come or spoken to, or somebody that you would have maybe not gotten along with in high school, or like whatever else, and I found in coming here that there's a willingness to go there in a way that is safe and contained and not uncontained. And what I mean by uncontained is if suddenly your own personal trauma story becomes so big that suddenly like the whole focus is shifted to caretaking, right? And you've been in rooms where that's happened, either to you personally, I've been in rooms where that's happened to me personally, or in rooms where that's happened to someone else. And what we learn in sustaining the work is our ability to be connected to our own process, however that is, whether it's therapy, whether it's your engagement in your spiritual work or your church, whether it's your connection to a team or a community of some sort. My wife likes to run in a group of people. Those are that's her community, that's her self-care. So not only is it self-care and the physical activity, it's also coming into community, coming into contact with other people, and having a positive shared experience that propels you, that moves you forward, that makes you feel good. I will remove the soapbox and get off of it and just say thank you to all of you. I appreciate you, I appreciate your time, and I'm very thankful that you're doing what you're doing, or will be doing the work that you're doing if you're new to news and this type of work. And I want to give anyone an opportunity just to tie a bow on it if you have anything that you wanted to add before we all make him clean up.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone on Zoom have anything that you wanted to add before we shut it down?
Just thank you. This was a great session.
Cool. Thank you. Let us know if you ever want CCT up at your school. We're happy to come and meet and talk, and we'll even prepare a PowerPoint. We do that too.
You don't have to prepare a PowerPoint. I don't want I don't want to stretch you and tax you.
Hey, I got partners who do the PowerPoints. They're really good. Oh, yeah.
You
If ever-
delegate, you delegate.
If you ever seen a Katie Stiff PowerPoint, they got to see it with motivational interviewing here a couple of months ago. She does a phenomenal job, and so does Chris Badley. So, yeah.
Well, you'll be getting an invite here. So
Cool.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Okay, guys. Thank you so much.